You won't get a penny of Mom's $40 million. Those words still ring in my ears like a church bell struck wrong. Not whispered in grief, not softened with sympathy. They were spat, like a blade turned sideways, meant to cut me where it hurt most. My own daughter, standing in the hallway outside the lawyer's office, hissed them under her breath as though I were an unwelcome guest at my wife's funeral, not her husband of 43 years. I froze, hand on the polished brass handle of the conference room door. For a second, I thought I must have misheard. Maybe she said plenty, or ready, or anything else that didn't turn my stomach into ice. But no. Her voice was sharp, cold, and dripping with certainty. You won't get a penny. I had been bracing myself for this day, in the way a man braces for the impact he knows is coming. The will reading, the dividing of everything Ellen and I built. I thought grief would be the heaviest burden in that room. I was wrong. It was betrayal. Inside, I heard muffled voices. The lawyer, Mr. Whitman, arranging his files. My daughter, Clara, talking with her husband in that same clipped tone she'd been using on me since the funeral ended. To them, this was a transaction, a windfall, a door swinging open to a future they had already priced and purchased in their minds. To me, it was my wife's life, laid out in black ink on white paper. Every dollar of that fortune carried Ellen's touch. Her vision, her sleepless nights, her brilliance. I had walked beside her every step, carrying boxes, fixing late-night breakdowns, poring over contracts at the kitchen table. And now, our only child stood poised to erase me from it all. The hallway smelled faintly of lemon polish, the kind janitors use to hide years of old carpet and tired wood. It took me back to another hallway, the hospital where Ellen had spent her last weeks. The same smell of antiseptic and lemon trying to cover decay. I gripped the watch on my wrist, the one she gave me on our 25th anniversary. Her words on that day were carved into the back. For every second we have left. My fingers traced the engraving like a man searching for strength in Scripture. I wanted to storm in and demand how my own daughter could look at me and call me undeserving. But another voice stopped me, quieter, older. Ellen's. Guard your strength. Don't fight in anger. Choose your moment. She had said that often, especially in those final months. So I swallowed the words that burned my tongue. I opened the conference room door, forcing my face into calm. Clara barely looked at me. She was leaning over her phone, scrolling. Her husband smirking beside her like a man who already felt the leather of a new sports car beneath his hands. "Dad," she said, with a tone that stripped the word of its meaning, "are you ready?" Am I ready? No, I wasn't ready for my wife to be gone. I wasn't ready to be treated like a relic, standing on the edge of a fortune I helped build. I wasn't ready for the little girl whose hand I once held through thunderstorms to now look at me as though I were the storm. But I nodded anyway. Yes. I lowered myself into the chair at the long mahogany table. The leather creaked under my weight, and I noticed how my hands trembled as they rested on the polished surface. I clasped them together to hide the shake. Across from me, Clara whispered to her husband, and they both chuckled softly, as though the outcome was already theirs. Mr. Whitman cleared his throat. He was a man in his 70s, silver hair combed neatly, glasses perched low on his nose. He looked at me kindly, perhaps sensing the battlefield I was stepping into. "We'll begin in just a few moments," he said, shuffling papers. "I want to make sure all documents are in order." Clara leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "It's simple," she said. "Mom left everything to me. That's what she promised." Her confidence was venom, dripping slowly into the room. I studied her face. Same eyes as Ellen, same little crease in her forehead when she frowned. But the warmth I used to know in those features had calcified into entitlement. The room blurred for a moment as my chest tightened. I remembered Clara at 6 years old, running across the yard, in the house Ellen and I built with our bare hands. She had tripped and skinned her knee. She had looked up at me, eyes wet, and said, "Daddy, will you carry me?" I had scooped her up without hesitation, holding her tight, promising silently that I'd carry her as long as she needed me. And now here she was, carrying her mother's fortune in her mouth like a weapon, ready to strike me down with it. I blinked hard, forcing the memory away. I needed to be present. I needed to hear every word, watch every move, because something in my gut told me this day would not unfold the way Clara imagined. Ellen had been too careful, too wise, to leave everything to a daughter who had begun treating love like currency. I sat straighter, squaring my shoulders. For years I had let Clara think I was the quiet one, the easy one. But Ellen knew better. She always said, "When you finally dig your heels in, Roy, there's no moving you." Today, my heels were planted. Mr. Whitman folded his hands and looked at us. "Shall we begin?" Clara smiled thinly, turning to her husband. "Yes, let's get this over with." I didn't smile. I just tightened my grip on Ellen's watch, and for the first time since her funeral, I felt a flicker of something new beneath the grief. Not hope, not yet, but resolve. Because whatever was written in those documents, I knew one truth. I wasn't about to be erased. People look at numbers like $40 million and see greed or envy. But when I look at it, I see years. Years of sweat. Years of missed dinners. Years of my wife waking up at dawn to draft proposals while I fixed leaky pipes in the warehouse. That money isn't just money. It's time carved out of our lives. Moments traded for something we believed in together. Ellen wasn't born into wealth. Neither was I. We were two stubborn kids from working-class families who thought if we just worked hard enough, we could carve out something better. And somehow, against every odd stacked against us, we did. She had the vision. I had the hands. She could walk into a boardroom and make investors see a future where there was nothing but risk. And I could walk into a gutted building and figure out how to run the electrical, plumbing, and logistics without bankrupting us. We were mismatched in some ways, but together we made a whole. I still remember the first time she told me her idea. We were sitting on the sagging couch in our starter apartment, the one with springs that poked through the fabric and made your back ache after 10 minutes. She held this binder. She always loved binders, neat tabs, notes in the margins, and she laid it out like she was already speaking to a crowd of shareholders. "There's going to be a demand for healthcare logistics that no one's ready for," she said. "If we can build the infrastructure, we can ride the wave before anyone else catches on." I laughed, not because I didn't believe her, but because we had exactly $317 in our bank account at the time. But Ellen had that spark in her eyes, the one that made you believe, even if you couldn't see it yet. So I nodded and said, "Tell me what you need me to build." And that was it. That was the beginning. Years blurred into one another. We scraped. We borrowed. I worked double shifts at construction sites, came home with concrete dust in my hair, then spent the night helping Ellen sort invoices or review supply chain plans. She worked days at the hospital to keep the lights on, then spent nights drawing maps of distribution hubs we couldn't afford yet. We lived on ramen and black coffee, telling ourselves someday it would all pay off. And then it did. Slowly, then all at once. Contracts came through. A small warehouse turned into 2, then 5. We bought our first fleet of trucks, used, beat up, but ours. I remember the smell of diesel mixing with Ellen's perfume as she stood in the lot, clipboard in hand, inspecting each one like they were newborn children. She looked at me, that grin spreading across her face. We're really doing this, Roy. By the time we hit our 10th anniversary, we weren't scraping anymore. We had employees, real offices. We bought our first proper house. Not a starter, not a fixer-upper, but a place with a yard and a bay window Ellen had dreamed about since she was a girl. I built her that window myself. Stayed up till midnight, hammering, sanding, staining until it was perfect. She sat there every morning with her tea, sunlight spilling across, her lap, telling me about her next idea. That house became more than just wood and nails. It became the heartbeat of our family. Every Christmas, Clara would come racing down the stairs to that tree in the corner, shrieking with joy when she saw what Santa brought. I'd watch Ellen watching Clara, and for a moment, the exhaustion melted away. Every scraped knuckle, every overdue bill, every sacrifice. It was all worth it when I saw them both smile. But money changes people. Not all at once. Not like a switch flipping. It seeps in slowly, quietly, like water through a crack in the foundation. At first, it felt like freedom. We could buy Clara new clothes without checking the price tag, send her to the best schools, take her on vacations we'd only seen in brochures. Ellen insisted, she deserves better than we had. And I agreed. I wanted my little girl to have the world. Still, sometimes, late at night, Ellen would whisper to me, "We have to be careful, Roy. She's starting to think money just appears." I'd laugh it off, because how could I deny our daughter anything when she looked at me with those big eyes and called me the best dad in the world? Looking back now, I see it. The small moments. The way Clara sneered when I asked her to help with chores. The way she boasted to her friends about our company as though she had put in the sweat. The time she threw a tantrum because we couldn't afford the imported car she wanted for her 17th birthday. Never mind the second-hand sedan we scraped to buy her, which she barely said thank you for. Ellen saw it more clearly than I did. She tried to nudge Clara toward humility, volunteer work, anything that would teach her gratitude. But Clara rolled her eyes, said charity was for people who didn't have real goals. Ellen cried that night quietly so Clara wouldn't hear. I held her, told her it was just a phase. I wanted to believe it was. When we sold the company, Ellen's diagnosis came almost the same month. The check cleared and our bank account held numbers I couldn't comprehend. But she was already fading. $40 million and not one penny could buy me more time with her. And Clara? She didn't cry when Ellen broke the news of her illness. Not really. She hugged her, said all the right things. But there was this flicker in her eyes, a calculation. Like she was already tallying what came next. That's the part that keeps me awake at night. I was so busy holding Ellen's hand, making sure she was comfortable, that I didn't see what our daughter was becoming right under our roof. Ellen tried to warn me. "Don't let her harden, Roy," she whispered in those final weeks. "Don't let money be the only thing she clings to when I'm gone," I promised her. God help me, I promised. And then today, in that hallway, Clara looked me dead in the eye and told me I wouldn't get a penny. Not a phase, not immaturity, not grief-talking. It was who she had chosen to become. And for the first time since Ellen passed, something colder than grief settled into me. Resolve. Because maybe Clara thought I was an old man to be brushed aside. But she had forgotten one thing. Ellen was the visionary, yes. But I was the builder. And I had built too much, sacrificed too much, to let my own daughter demolish everything in a single sentence. When people talk about children, they use words like innocent and pure. I believed that once. I believed Clara came into this world with nothing but light in her eyes, a heart untarnished. And for the first years, that was true. She was sweet, curious, the kind of little girl who would pick wildflowers for her mother and leave them in a jam jar on the windowsill. She would curl up in my lap, clutching her stuffed rabbit, and whisper, "Daddy, promise you'll never let me go." I never thought the same lips that begged me for bedtime stories would one day spit venom about pennies and millions. But the signs were there, even if I refused to see them. It started small. Birthday parties, for example. When Clara was 7, Ellen and I threw her a party in the backyard. Streamers, homemade cake, pin the tail on the donkey. The kind of simple gathering both of us had dreamed of as kids. Clara was happy until she visited a classmate a week later whose parents had rented an indoor amusement park for their daughter's celebration. After that, she cried, demanding to know why her party wasn't good enough. Ellen knelt beside her, explaining gently that happiness didn't come from how much money you spent. But Clara turned to me, eyes full of tears, and asked, "Why don't you want me to have nice things?" And like a fool, I caved. I told Ellen it was just a phase. Phases became patterns. At 12, she asked for a designer handbag, one that cost more than our monthly grocery bill back when Ellen and I were starting out. When I told her it was too much, she sulked for days, barely speaking to either of us. Ellen argued that we should hold our ground, but I wanted peace in the house. I bought the bag, and so the pattern set. Clara equated love with what she received, not what was given from the heart. High school only made it worse. Ellen and I worked tirelessly to give Clara opportunities we never had. Private school, extracurriculars, tutors. But instead of gratitude, Clara seemed to believe she was owed. She mocked classmates who didn't wear the latest fashion. She threw tantrums if she wasn't allowed to upgrade her phone the week a new model was released. She rolled her eyes when Ellen encouraged her to volunteer at the local shelter. "Why would I waste my time there?" Clara said once, slamming her bedroom door. "I'm not poor." That night, Ellen wept quietly at the kitchen table, her tea gone cold. She told me, "Roy, I'm scared. She's losing her kindness." I rubbed her back and told her all teenagers were selfish. I reminded her how I had once been storming out of the house over curfews and rules. "She'll grow out of it," I said. "She's just testing limits." But deep down, I worried Ellen was right. When Clara turned 16, we bought her a used car, a sensible little sedan. Clean, reliable, nothing flashy. I thought she'd be thrilled. Instead, she barely looked at it before asking, "What about the convertible?" She had seen her friend pull up in a glossy red one the week before. "This is what we can afford," I told her. "Be grateful you have a car at all." She rolled her eyes and muttered, "You don't understand what people expect from me." That line stuck with me. What people expected from her? As though her worth depended on appearances, on being envied. Ellen tried again to steer her toward perspective, arranging for Clara to shadow at the hospital one summer. Clara lasted a week before declaring it boring and insisting she'd rather spend her time at the mall. By the time college applications came around, Clara's sense of entitlement had hardened. She demanded the best dorm, the most expensive meal plan, the trendiest wardrobe to fit in. Ellen and I paid, hoping education would temper her, teach her discipline. Instead, she came home with stories of parties, designer labels, and friends who seemed cut from the same cloth. The worst moment came during her sophomore year. She called one night frantic, saying she was in trouble. Ellen and I drove hours to reach her. Turns out she'd maxed out 2 credit cards we didn't even know she had, spending thousands on clothes and trips. She expected us to cover it. Ellen tried to talk sense into her, but Clara snapped, "It's not like you can't afford it. You're successful now. Stop acting like we're poor." I'll never forget the look on Ellen's face. It wasn't anger. It was heartbreak. Later that night, Ellen whispered to me, "We gave her everything, And somehow, we failed to give her enough. I told her not to blame herself, but the truth was, I had a hand in it. Every time I tried to buy peace with gifts, every time I softened instead of standing firm, I chipped away at the gratitude Ellen was trying to instill. And then came her fiancé, Eric. Smooth-talking, sharp suit, eyes always scanning the room like he was calculating net worths. He fed Clara's entitlement like gasoline on a fire. "You're the heir to a fortune," I once overheard him say. "Start acting like it." That was the moment the last thread snapped. Ellen told me afterward, "He's not good for her. He doesn't see her as a person, just a ticket." But Clara wouldn't hear a word against him. She said we were jealous of her happiness. I watched my little girl slip further away, wrapped in entitlement and arrogance, while Ellen's health declined. It was as if one life was being snuffed out, while another hardened into something unrecognizable. When Ellen finally passed, I thought grief might soften Clara, remind her of what mattered. But at the funeral, she spent more time whispering with Eric about next steps than mourning her mother. That's when I realized Ellen's warnings weren't paranoia. They were prophecy. So when Clara leaned close to me in that hallway and said I wouldn't get a penny, it wasn't just cruelty in the moment. It was the harvest of seeds planted years before, watered by indulgence and entitlement until greed bloomed fully in my daughter's heart. And I knew then, if Ellen left safeguards in place, and God, I hope she had, they would be the only thing standing between Clara's hunger and the legacy we built. I can still hear the sound of the heart monitor, the soft, steady beeping that mocked me with every rise and fall. It wasn't the sound of life, not anymore. It was the sound of borrowed time, of seconds slipping through our fingers, no matter how tightly I tried to hold them. Ellen lay in that hospital bed, her once strong frame reduced to fragile bones, wrapped in pale skin. The woman who once marched through warehouses barking orders, who could drive a truck herself if the driver didn't show up, who could stare down investors twice her size, now struggled to lift a cup of water. I remember sitting by her side, holding her hand. Her fingers trembled in mine, cold even beneath the layers of blankets. "Roy," she whispered, her voice a rasp, "you're holding too tight." I forced a smile, loosening my grip, though my heart screamed to never let go. "If I let go, you'll float away," I said. Her lips twitched, that half-smile she used to give me when I tried to joke away my fear. "You can't hold me here, love. Not forever." I bowed my head. "I don't know how to do this without you." She closed her eyes, took a shallow breath. "You'll do it the same way you've always done it. One step at a time. One nail, one board, one brick. You're the builder. You make things stand." I didn't feel like a builder in that moment. I felt like a man watching the foundation of his life crumble, powerless to stop it. But Ellen wasn't done. She squeezed my hand weakly, forcing my eyes to hers. Those eyes, still sharp, still full of the fire that built an empire. "Listen to me, Roy. Promise me something." "Anything," I whispered. "Promise me you'll protect what we built. Not just the money, the meaning behind it, the years, the sacrifices. Promise me you won't let them use it to destroy each other." I swallowed hard. I knew who she meant by they. She meant Clara. Ellen's eyes filled with tears. "She's ours, Roy. She'll always be ours. But she's lost. She's listening to the wrong voices. I see greed where there used to be kindness. If I'm not here to guide her—" Her voice broke. "Promise me you'll guide her. Promise me you'll protect her from herself." I wanted to argue. I wanted to say Clara would come around, that grief would change her, soften her heart. But I couldn't lie to Ellen. Not now. Not when every word might be her last. So I nodded, my throat tight. I promise. Her tears slipped down her cheeks, and I brushed them away with my thumb. Good, she whispered, because you're stronger than you think. Stronger than she gives you credit for. Don't let her mistake your kindness for weakness. I kissed her hand. I'll keep her safe. I'll protect it all. I swear. For a long moment, we just sat there in silence. The monitor beeped. The IV dripped. Nurses shuffled in the hallway outside. And I memorized her face, the way her chest rose and fell, the way the light from the window outlined her profile like a portrait I could never hang on a wall. Then she whispered something I'll never forget. Guard the love, Roy, not the money. It was so faint I almost thought I imagined it. But those were the last clear words she gave me before the morphine dulled her, before the beeping slowed, before I found myself standing over a body that was no longer my Ellen. I stayed by her side long after they wheeled the machines away, long after the nurses stopped checking in. I sat in that chair, staring at her wedding ring on her thin finger. The same ring I had slipped on her hand 43 years earlier in a church too small to fit our dreams. That ring became a symbol, a commandment etched in gold. Protect what we built. Protect Clara, even if she didn't want protecting. Protect the meaning of it all. At the funeral, I clutched that promise like a shield. I wore the watch she gave me, the tie she loved, the ring I had given her. People offered condolences, but all I could hear was the echo of her words. Guard the love, not the money. Clara cried a little during the service, but even then I caught her whispering to Eric about next steps. She wiped her cheeks quickly when people looked her way, but her eyes were dry the moment attention shifted. I told myself it was grief masking itself as practicality. That's what I wanted to believe. But Ellen's warning kept tugging at me. Don't let her mistake your kindness for weakness. And then came the days after, when Clara began circling me like a vulture, asking about accounts, titles, deeds, talking about how things needed to be streamlined, how Mom wanted me to handle it all. That's when I realized Ellen had known. She had seen it coming and prepared. She left me more than memories and promises. She left me tools, a binder, a trust, safeguards. She hadn't trusted Clara to guard the legacy. She had trusted me, and I had promised her on her deathbed that I would. So when Clara hissed in that hallway that I wouldn't get a penny, I didn't answer her. I didn't need to, because Ellen had already answered, her through me. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about love. This was about a promise, and I intended to keep it. The day after we buried Ellen, the house felt colder than it ever had. Not just because she was gone, but because of the way Clara walked through it. She didn't move like someone grieving. She moved like someone inspecting property. She trailed her fingers along the banister as if deciding whether to replace it. She lingered in the kitchen, whispering to Eric about remodeling ideas. At one point, I caught her standing in Ellen's study, not crying, not touching her mother's books with reverence, but flipping through drawers, pulling out files, as though the room were hers to catalog. I stood in the doorway, gripping the frame so tight my knuckles went white. "What are you doing?" I asked. She barely flinched. "Looking for important papers. Mom told me once she had insurance files in here." Insurance files. The way she said it, brisk, impatient, as if Ellen were nothing but a ledger to be balanced. "Clara," I said carefully, "your mother's things should be left alone. At least for now." She sighed, closing the drawer with a snap. "Dad, I know this is hard for you, but we need to be practical. Mom left everything to me, and I need to start sorting it out." The sooner we organize things, the smoother this will be." Her words hit like a hammer. "Left everything to me." She said it with such certainty, such casual authority, as though it were fact carved in stone. I wanted to argue. I wanted to shout that Ellen hadn't left her a dime without strings, that she had entrusted me with the keys. But I remembered Ellen's warning. Choose your moment. So I only nodded slowly and said, "We'll see what the lawyer says." That night, I sat alone in Ellen's study after Clara had gone. The room still smelled faintly of lavender, her favorite candle. My eyes drifted to the shelf where she kept her most important binders, color-coded with tabs, her handwriting neat and precise. And there it was, a thick navy blue binder, heavier than the rest, tucked behind a row of books. I pulled it down and set it on the desk. The cover was embossed in gold letters. Estate binder. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were dividers labeled with Ellen's familiar neat script, trust documents, will, financial accounts, letters. And then, tucked in a pocket at the back, I found it, a sealed envelope with my name written across it. Roy. Just that. Simple. Final. I didn't open it. Not yet. My chest felt too tight, my eyes too wet. Instead, I flipped through the binder. Ellen had left everything mapped out, as if she had known Clara would come circling like a hawk. Passwords, account numbers, contact names for attorneys, financial advisors, even the realtor she trusted. And then, tucked behind a tab labeled Trust Summary, I found the truth. Ellen had placed the bulk of her fortune, the full $40 million, into a trust. The trust named me as lifetime income beneficiary and successor trustee. Clara's name was there too, but not as she imagined. She wasn't the heir. She was a remainder beneficiary, and her access was conditional. I leaned back in Ellen's chair, staring at the ceiling. Relief mixed with grief until I couldn't tell the two apart. She had seen what I hadn't. She had prepared for the storm. The next morning, Clara pressed harder. She showed up at the house with Eric, carrying folders of her own. "We need to talk," she said, her tone brisk, businesslike. I led them to the kitchen table. Ellen's chair sat empty across from me, and I felt her absence like a knife twisting. Eric spread out papers. "We've spoken with a financial advisor. It'll be simpler if you transfer assets directly into Clara's name now, before probate drags things out. There are tax advantages." I stared at him. "Probate hasn't even begun. Nothing can be transferred until after the will reading." Clara's eyes narrowed. "Dad, don't make this harder than it has to be. Mom trusted me to handle this. You don't understand how these things work." I felt my jaw clench. For years I had let her talk down to me, let her think I was the quiet one, the simple man who just built what Ellen envisioned. But she had no idea how many nights I had sat at this very table, helping Ellen balance accounts, drafting budgets, arguing over contracts. "I understand enough," I said evenly, "and I'll wait for the lawyer." Her mouth twisted. "Fine, but don't expect special treatment. Mom made her wishes clear." When they finally left, their words echoed in the walls of that house Ellen and I built. I sat in silence, running my hand across the grain of the table, where Ellen and I had shared countless meals, laughter, arguments, plans. And I whispered to her ghost, "Don't worry, love. I'll keep the promise." That night I finally opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, Ellen's handwriting flowing across the page. "Roy, if you are reading this, then I'm gone. Please don't grieve too long. You always carried me when I was weak. Now you must carry yourself. Clara will not understand at first. She may fight you. But trust the lawyer. Trust the plan. Protect what we built. Remember, it was never about the money. It was about the love. Guard that above all." I read it 3 times, each word carving itself into me. Ellen hadn't just left me instructions, she had left me strength. When I folded the letter back into its envelope, my grief shifted. It was still there, heavy as ever, but it had company now. Resolve. Clara thought she could erase me. She thought she could claim everything with a smirk and a signature. But Ellen had handed me the armor and the sword, and I was ready to use them. The binder sat on Ellen's desk like a treasure chest. Only this chest wasn't filled with gold. It was filled with foresight. I'd always teased her about her obsession with order. Color-coded files, sticky notes in neat rows, binders for every stage of our lives. Vacations had itineraries. Birthdays had folders. Even our Christmas decorations had laminated checklists. I used to joke that if the world ended, we could rebuild civilization just by following Ellen's binders. Now, sitting in her study with the estate binder spread open in front of me, I realized she had been preparing not for the end of the world, but for her own. I flipped through the sections slowly, careful not to miss a single detail. Each divider was labeled in her tidy script: trust documents, will, financial accounts, legal contacts, personal notes. She had thought of everything, down to leaving me a list of which bank tellers she trusted and which ones had sticky fingers. The trust documents section stopped me cold. Legal words stared back at me, but Ellen had anticipated that too. She'd left a summary in plain English, handwritten in blue ink on lined paper. Roy, she had written at the top. I know legal jargon drives you crazy, so here it is simply. The trust owns the assets now. Not Clara, not you. The trust. You are the successor trustee. That means you control how and when distributions are made. You are also the lifetime income beneficiary. That means you are taken care of for the rest of your life. Clara cannot touch what supports you. Clara is a remainder beneficiary. She may inherit after your passing, but only if she meets the conditions I set. I sat back in Ellen's chair, the leather creaking beneath me. My eyes kept drifting back to that one line. You control how and when distributions are made. For weeks, Clara had been circling me like a shark, certain she already owned everything. And here, in Ellen's careful script, was the truth. She owned nothing. Not yet. Not without me. I read on. Ellen had been meticulous. She had listed Clara's past advances, the car, the condo deposit, the money for her failed boutique business. Each amount was noted, added, totaled. Nearly $500,000 in loans that would be charged against Clara's eventual inheritance. If she insists she received nothing, remind her of this, Ellen had written. I couldn't help but smile, a sad, weary smile. Ellen had always seen further down the road than I did. While I was hammering nails, she was sketching blueprints. Even in death, she was still looking out for me, still protecting the legacy we built together. There was another section labeled Conditions. My hands shook slightly as I pulled out the document. It wasn't the dry legalese I expected. It was Ellen's words, typed neatly, with a clause highlighted in yellow. Clara shall not receive distributions unless she demonstrates responsibility, refrains from elder abuse or coercion, and makes a sincere effort at reconciliation with her father. Any violation will forfeit her interest, and her share will be redirected to the charitable foundation. My chest tightened. Elder abuse? Coercion? Ellen had seen it coming. Maybe not the exact words Clara hissed in that hallway, but the spirit of them. Ellen had known Clara might try to push me out, manipulate me, cast me aside, and she had put safeguards in place to stop it. I flipped to the back of the binder. Another envelope rested there, smaller, thinner. Across it, in Ellen's hand, were 2 words. For the lawyer. I didn't open it. That one wasn't mine to open. But I could imagine its contents. A directive, a statement, maybe even a video. Something that would cut through Clara's arrogance with the finality only Ellen's voice could carry. I sat there for hours, reading, rereading, committing every detail to memory. The longer I studied, the more a plan formed in my mind. I didn't need to argue with Clara. I didn't need to defend myself against her barbs. All I had to do was wait, sit quietly, let her reveal her greed, and then let the lawyer open the binder's truths in front of her. For years, Clara had underestimated me. She saw me as the man who fixed things, not the man who understood things. She saw me as the father who said yes too often, the husband who stood in Ellen's shadow. She thought she could steamroll me because I'd always stepped aside before. But Ellen hadn't left me in the shadows. She had put the weight of our fortune in my hands, not because I was the loudest, not because I demanded it, but because she trusted me to guard it with love, not greed. The clock in Ellen's study chimed softly. I realized the house was silent, too silent. For the first time since her passing, I didn't feel her presence in the room. But I didn't feel alone either. I felt steadied, like she had reached across the veil and placed a hand on my shoulder. I closed the binder gently, resting my palm on the cover. "I'll protect it, Ellen," I whispered. "I'll protect what we built. I promise." And in that moment, grief gave way to something stronger. Not anger, not vengeance, but resolve, pure and sharp. Because the day of the will reading was coming. Clara thought she'd already won, but she had no idea what Ellen had left behind. She had no idea her mother's voice would speak louder than her greed. I walked into Mr. Whitman's office 3 days before the will reading with Ellen's binder tucked under my arm. The leather straps of the satchel bit into my shoulder, but I carried it like a weapon. And in many ways, that's exactly what it was. Ellen's weapon, her plan, her voice preserved in ink and tabs. Whitman's office was everything you'd expect of an old estate attorney. Dark oak bookshelves lined with leather-bound volumes, certificates framed on the walls, a heavy desk that looked older than me. He rose as I entered, his silver hair catching the morning light. "Roy," he said warmly, extending his hand. "I'm glad you came." I sat across from him, setting the binder gently on his desk. "Ellen left this," I said. My voice still wavered on her name. He adjusted his glasses, flipping the cover open. "Ah, yes. She mentioned she'd been preparing her affairs carefully." He glanced up at me. "I take it Clara has already begun pressing?" I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Pressing is one word for it. She told me outright I wouldn't see a penny." Whitman's mouth tightened. "I'm sorry you had to hear that. Unfortunately, grief and greed are close cousins." Greed. The word felt like a stone dropped into water, rippling through me. I nodded slowly. "Ellen saw it coming, didn't she?" Whitman tapped the binder. "She did, and she prepared accordingly." For the next hour, he walked me through the trust in detail. The bulk of the estate, the $40 million, sat firmly within the trust. As trustee, I controlled distributions. I was entitled to lifetime income for my health and maintenance. Clara was listed as a remainder beneficiary, but only under conditions Ellen had personally drafted. Whitman leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "In plain terms, Roy, Clara can inherit only if she meets Ellen's standards. Employment, responsibility, respect. And most importantly, no coercion or abuse. If she violates those terms, or if she challenges the trust, she forfeits her inheritance." The assets would flow directly to the charitable foundation Ellen established. I let the words settle, feeling their weight. "So she can't just take me to court and cut me out." "Not without risking everything," Whitman said. "The no contest clause is ironclad. If she challenges and loses, even slightly, she gets nothing." A small smile tugged at my lips for the first time in weeks. Clara had built her arrogance on the assumption that I was powerless. She had no idea that the very act of trying to strike me down could destroy her own claim. Whitman continued, "You should also know that Ellen documented Clara's prior advances. Loans, not gifts. Those amounts will be deducted from any future inheritance. It's all here." He tapped the binder again. I pictured Clara's face when those numbers were read aloud. The condo deposit, the boutique business, the car, hundreds of thousands she had already consumed, believing them entitlements. Ellen had been keeping score all along. "Mr. Whitman," I said slowly, "how do we handle the reading?" He folded his hands. "You sit, you listen, you say very little. Let Clara speak first if she insists. Let her reveal herself. When she does, the documents and Ellen's voice will speak louder than any defense you could offer." I nodded. It was the same strategy Ellen had whispered to me in the hospital. Choose your moment. Whitman gave me a measured look. "I'll warn you, Roy. She may react badly. Some beneficiaries scream, some storm out, some even threaten violence when they learn the truth. You must remain calm. That will be your greatest weapon. Calmness unsettles those who thrive on control. Calmness. It wasn't my strong suit. I was a builder, a worker, a man who solved problems with sweat and tools. But maybe that's why Ellen had chosen this path, to force me into stillness, to let the truth itself do the work. Before I left, Whitman slid a smaller envelope across the desk. "Ellen left this with me as well. A personal statement. It will be presented during the reading." I stared at the envelope. Her handwriting on the front sent a pang straight through my chest. I wanted to rip it open then and there, to hear her words again. But I forced myself to leave it sealed. It wasn't mine to hear yet. It was for Clara. As I rose to leave, Whitman gave me a steady nod. "Your wife trusted you with this, Roy. That should tell you everything you need to know." I walked out into the crisp air of downtown, binder under my arm, Ellen's envelope still burning in my mind. Cars honked, people hurried past, life bustled on. But inside me, something shifted. For weeks I had been staggering under grief, bending beneath Clara's scorn. Now, for the first time since Ellen's last breath, I stood straighter. I wasn't just a widower waiting to be discarded. I was the guardian of a legacy, the trustee of a promise. As I walked back to my car, I caught my reflection in a shop window. Tired eyes, lines deeper than I remembered, but also something else, resolve. The kind Ellen used to tease me about when I was stubborn. I touched my watch, the engraving still warm under my thumb. For every second we have left. Ellen had given me her seconds. Now it was my turn to use them well. The stage was set. Clara thought the reading would be her coronation. She thought the world was about to hand her everything she demanded. But she had no idea the ground beneath her was already crumbling, and I had no intention of warning her. The closer we drew to the will reading, the bolder Clara became. It was as if she could smell victory in the air, and every day she circled tighter, sharpening her claws. It started with the bank cards. One morning, I tried to buy groceries, and the card was declined. Confused, I called the bank. After a long hold, the woman on the line told me that Clara had placed temporary freezes on several joint accounts, citing estate transition. I stood there in the checkout line, eggs and bread on the conveyor belt, while people behind me shifted impatiently. My face burned as I fumbled for cash, something I hadn't carried in years. That night, I confronted Clara. She didn't even blink. "It's just temporary, Dad. I need to make sure everything's in order before probate." "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." The arrogance in her voice made my stomach churn. "Clara, you don't control those accounts, not yet. Not until after the will is read. She smirked, sipping wine from a crystal glass Ellen had treasured. "Dad, stop embarrassing yourself. Mom left it all to me. You'll be comfortable, of course, but you don't need access to every dollar. That's reckless at your age." Reckless. At my age. I gripped the edge of the counter until my knuckles turned white. Ellen's words echoed in my mind. Don't let her mistake your kindness for weakness. But instead of shouting, I swallowed my anger and simply nodded. We'll see what the lawyer says. The next week, she pushed harder. She demanded the house keys. It's too big for you alone, she said, striding through the hallway as if she already owned it. Eric and I are going to start renovations soon. You should think about moving somewhere smaller, maybe assisted living. It'll be easier on everyone. I stared at her. This is the house your mother and I built, with our own hands, every wall, every window. She cut me off. And now it's mine. Dad, stop clinging to the past. Mom's gone. The future belongs to me. Her words hit like fists. Ellen's ghost seemed to rise in the room, her voice whispering, "Protect it. Protect what we built." That night, I sat at the dining room table alone, staring at the envelope Ellen had left for me. I unfolded the letter again, running my fingers over her handwriting. Trust the plan. Protect what we built. The words steadied me like a hand on my shoulder. Clara thought she was pushing me out of my own life, but in reality, every shove only pushed me closer to resolve. The final straw came 2 nights before the reading. Clara and Eric invited me to dinner at their condo. I went, mostly out of curiosity, partly to see how far she'd take her charade. From the moment I walked in, it was a performance. Expensive wine, catered food, Eric boasting about their future plans. Clara leaned across the table, eyes glittering. "We've decided to form a family office," she said. "Eric will manage the portfolio, and I'll oversee charitable giving. You won't need to worry about a thing." "A family office?" I asked quietly. "Yes," Eric said smoothly. "We've already been in touch with a few advisors. They were thrilled when they heard about the size of the estate. This is generational wealth. We'll ensure it grows responsibly." I studied them both. They weren't inviting me to join. They were informing me of my exile. Clara smiled, almost pitying. "Dad, you've had your time. You built a foundation, and Mom expanded it. But now it's our turn. We're the future. You can relax, enjoy retirement, travel if you want. We'll handle everything." I set my fork down slowly. For a moment, I considered telling her right then and there. Telling her about the trust, the conditions, the no-contest clause that could strip her of everything if she pushed too hard. But then I remembered Whitman's advice. Let her speak first. Let her arrogance hang her. So I simply nodded and said, "Sounds like you've made a lot of plans." Her smile widened. "We have." The rest of the dinner passed in a haze. Eric droned on about investment strategies. Clara gushed about remodeling my house as if I were already gone. I left early, claiming fatigue. Back home, I went to Ellen's closet. I hadn't touched it since she passed, couldn't bear to. But that night, I opened the door and pulled out the tie she loved, navy blue with thin silver stripes. I laid it on the dresser beside my watch. Symbols, armor. I whispered into the empty room, "I'll wear it when the truth comes out." The morning of the reading, I rose before dawn. I shaved, polished my shoes, knotted the tie with hands that trembled less than I expected. Looking in the mirror, I hardly recognized myself. Not the broken widower Clara thought she could erase. Not the quiet man in Ellen's shadow, but the trustee, the guardian, the husband who had made a promise. As I buttoned my jacket, Ellen's voice echoed in my memory. "Guard the love, Roy, not the money." And I realized that was exactly what I was doing. The money was secondary. What mattered was preserving Ellen's intent, protecting the meaning behind every sacrifice we'd made. Clara thought she was marching into a coronation. She had no idea she was walking into her own undoing, and I, for once, would not need to lift a finger. All I had to do was sit quietly, let her arrogance spill over, and then watch as Ellen's voice, steady, undeniable, spoke from beyond the grave. The conference room smelled faintly of leather and paper, like a library that had forgotten how to breathe. A long mahogany table stretched across the room, polished to a mirror's shine. I sat at one end, the tie Ellen loved snug at my throat, her watch warm against my wrist. Clara swept in with Eric at her side, her heels clicking on the floor like the march of an army claiming conquered ground. Two other men trailed behind, advisors, or maybe just vultures she called financial experts. She didn't look at me as she sat, only adjusted her blazer and whispered something to Eric that made him smirk. Mr. Whitman, calm as always, shuffled papers at the head of the table. His glasses caught the overhead light, hiding his eyes. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "Today we'll review the estate plan of Ellen Whitaker." At the mention of Ellen's name, my throat tightened. I swallowed hard, steadying myself. Clara leaned forward impatiently. "Let's just get to it," she said. "We all know the bulk of the estate is mine. Dad understands that." I didn't reply. My silence seemed to annoy her more than any argument could. Whitman, cleared his throat. "As executor and attorney for the estate, I will read from both the will and the trust documents Mrs. Whitaker prepared. We'll proceed in order." He began with the will. Bequests to distant cousins, small gifts to friends, donations to charities Ellen had quietly supported for years, a hospice, a scholarship fund, a shelter for battered women. Each name, each cause, made me see her face again, that determined kindness that had driven her whole life. Clara rolled her eyes. "This is all small stuff," she muttered. "Can we move on to the main assets?" Whitman ignored her and continued. Then he turned a page, his tone steady. "The family residence, including the contents therein, is conveyed not to the daughter, but to the trust, of which Roy Whitaker is trustee and lifetime resident." Clara's head snapped toward me, eyes narrowing. "What?" Whitman looked over his glasses. "It means your father will remain in the house for the duration of his life. It is not yours to occupy or sell." Color crept into Clara's cheeks. Eric shifted uncomfortably beside her, whispering something I couldn't hear. Whitman pressed on. "As for the financial accounts the company proceeds, and the investment portfolios, these are not transferred outright by the will. They are held in the Ellen Whitaker Living Trust." At the word trust, Clara smiled again, regaining her composure. "Yes, the trust. I'm the beneficiary." Whitman raised a brow. "Not precisely." Her smile faltered. "What do you mean?" He tapped the page. "The trust designates Roy Whitaker as successor trustee and primary lifetime income beneficiary. He has full authority over distributions and management." The room went silent for a beat. Clara's face froze in disbelief, her lips parting. That can't be right." Whitman continued, unbothered. "Clara Whitaker is listed as a remainder beneficiary. She is eligible for distributions only after her father's passing, and only under specific conditions outlined by Mrs. Whitaker." The silence broke like glass. Clara slammed her hand on the table. "That's ridiculous. Mom told me I would control everything. She promised." Her voice rang through the conference room, sharp, shrill. One of her advisors coughed awkwardly. Eric's jaw tightened. I sat very still, my hands folded in front of me. I wanted to smile, but I didn't. Instead, I traced the edge of Ellen's watch with my thumb, grounding myself in silence. Whitman let the outburst pass before speaking again. Mrs. Whitaker was clear in her instructions. The trust is binding. It cannot be altered by verbal promises. Only the written terms govern. Clara leaned back, fuming, her eyes darting from Whitman to me. "This is manipulation," she spat. "Dad must have pressured her. He tricked her into this." I finally spoke, my voice calm. "Clara, your mother wrote this herself. You know as well as I do, no one ever pressured your mother into anything." Her cheeks flushed deeper. For a moment, I saw the little girl she once was, caught, embarrassed, cornered. But it vanished quickly, replaced by a sneer. Whitman turned to another section. "Mrs. Whitaker also detailed prior advances to you, Clara. Approximately $485,000 in loans to be deducted from your eventual inheritance." Clara's jaw dropped. "Loans? Those were gifts." Whitman shook his head. "Mrs. Whitaker's documentation is explicit. They are classified as advances. They reduce your share accordingly." Eric leaned toward her, whispering fiercely now. Clara's fists clenched in her lap. Whitman adjusted his glasses again, his voice steady as stone. "There are additional instructions, but those will be read momentarily." Clara slammed her chair back, half rising. "No, this isn't fair. Mom would never—" But Whitman raised a hand. "There is one more document." Mrs. Whitaker anticipated objections. She left a personal statement to be read aloud at this meeting. At that, my heart thudded. I already knew what was coming. Ellen's voice, her words, the final strike. Clara sat back down, pale now, her bravado faltering. Eric put a hand on her arm, but even he looked uneasy. Whitman reached for a sealed envelope. Ellen's handwriting curled across the front. For the reading. He broke the seal slowly, deliberately, the sound of tearing paper loud in the tense room. I held my breath. The moment Ellen had prepared for was here, and Clara had no idea how much colder the truth was about to get. The room fell into a silence so heavy it seemed to press against my chest. I watched Whitman unfold the letter with steady hands, smoothing it flat against the polished table. Ellen's handwriting stared up from the page, familiar curves and flourishes that pulled me straight back into our kitchen, where she used to leave notes on the fridge. "Don't forget milk. Don't forget me." Whitman cleared his throat and began to read. "To my family, if you are hearing these words, I am gone. But please know, I thought carefully about what I leave behind. Not just the money, not just the house, but the meaning of it all." Clara sat rigid, eyes locked on the paper, her jaw tight. "Roy, my love, you carried me through every storm. You built our world with your hands and your heart. Everything we achieved together. That is why I leave you as trustee. Not because you asked for it. You never would. But because I trust you above all others to guard what we built with love, not greed." My throat burned. I blinked hard, refusing to let the tears fall. Whitman continued, his voice steady. "Clara, my sweet girl, you are the joy of my life, and I will always love you. But love also means telling the truth. You are not ready to bear the weight of this fortune. I have seen entitlement harden you, and I fear what it might do if unchecked. That is why your inheritance is conditional. You must show responsibility. You must treat your father with respect. If you abuse him, coerce him, or challenge these terms, you will lose everything." Clara's face went white. The words, "lose everything," seemed to hang in the air like a noose. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Whitman read on. "If, however, you grow, if you find humility, if you reconcile with your father, if you prove capable of carrying this legacy with love, then you will inherit in due time. Until then, it remains in trust." Silence. Ellen's voice, though written, seemed to fill the room. I could hear her in every word, hear the firmness wrapped in love, the same tone she used when Clara was little and threw tantrums over toys. The same tone she used when she told investors no, when she told me yes, when she told the world exactly how it would be. Whitman folded the letter carefully and set it aside. "Those are Mrs. Whitaker's words." Clara looked at me then, her eyes wild. You made her write that. You turned her against me." I met her gaze calmly. "Clara, no one ever turned your mother into anything. You know that." Her chair scraped back violently as she stood. "This isn't fair. She promised me everything." Whitman's voice was cool, unshaken. "If you contest this trust, Ms. Whitaker, you forfeit your share entirely. The assets will pass to the foundation. That was your mother's explicit directive." Clara froze. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Real fear. Eric leaned toward her, hissing, "Sit down. Don't say another word." His mask of smooth control had cracked, revealing panic underneath. Slowly, Clara lowered herself back into the chair. Her face was pale, her lips trembling. She had strutted into this room expecting a crown. Instead, she sat like a child called to the principal's office, realizing the punishment was real. Whitman shuffled the papers back into order. "That concludes the reading. I will distribute certified copies of the documents to all relevant parties. Mr. Whitaker, as trustee, you and I will meet afterward to discuss administration." Clara didn't speak. Her hands clenched in her lap, knuckles white. Eric finally broke the silence. "We'll review this with our advisors," he muttered, though his tone lacked conviction. Whitman simply nodded. "Of course. But understand this. The documents are airtight. Mrs. Whitaker was very thorough." The meeting adjourned. Chairs scraped, papers rustled. Clara stood, her movements jerky, mechanical. For a moment she looked at me, not with love, not with respect, but with something closer to disbelief, as though she were seeing me clearly for the first time, and she didn't like what she saw. I stood slowly, buttoning my jacket. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I simply walked to the door, Ellen's tie steady against my chest, her watch ticking at my wrist. In the hallway, I finally exhaled. My knees felt weak, but inside me was something stronger than victory. It was the echo of Ellen's promise. Guard the love, not the money. She had spoken from beyond the grave, and her words had landed like thunder. Clara's face had gone white. Her arrogance had crumbled. And I, the man she thought she could erase, stood unshaken. For the first time in months I felt Ellen beside me. Not in the lavender scent of her study, not in the engraved watch, but in the power of her voice cutting through the noise, silencing greed, preserving love. As I walked out into the light of day, I whispered to her, "We did it, Ellen. We kept the promise." The silence after the will reading followed us like a shadow. Clara barely spoke to me as we walked out of the building. Eric tugged at her elbow, muttering about strategy and options, but she shook him off, her face pale, her lips tight. She didn't even look at me, not once. Back home, the house felt different. The walls seemed taller, the rooms wider. Ellen's absence still hung heavy, but Clara's voice, that constant, cutting arrogance, no longer echoed through the halls. Instead, the house exhaled, as if relieved. That night, I sat in Ellen's study, the estate binder closed on the desk, her letter tucked back into its envelope. I read it again and again, each word a lifeline. Guard the love, Roy, not the money. But how do you guard love when the person you're meant to love most looks at you like a stranger? 2 days later, Clara came by the house. She didn't knock. She just walked in, as though it still belonged to her. She stood in the doorway of the kitchen, arms folded, chin raised. "You think you've won," she said flatly. I looked up from the table where I was drinking coffee. "This isn't a contest, Clara." Her eyes narrowed. "Everything's a contest. Mom just stacked the deck in your favor. But don't fool yourself, Dad. This isn't over." She turned and left without another word. The door slammed, and in that sound, I heard the truth. Ellen's safeguards had worked, but they had also built a wall between me and my daughter. In the weeks that followed, I rarely saw her. When I did, it was always the same. Quick visits, clipped words, her eyes darting anywhere but mine. She no longer demanded the keys to the house, but she carried herself with the same brittle pride. Eric still hovered around her, whispering in her ear, filling her head with schemes. But even he seemed less certain now. The trust had teeth, and he knew it. I spent my days tending the house, fixing leaky faucets, trimming the hedges, repainting the porch. Small acts of maintenance that gave me a sense of control. At night, I sat in Ellen's chair by the bay window, sipping tea she once loved, watching the stars. Sometimes I wondered if Clara would ever soften. If one day she'd walk through the door, tears in her eyes, ready to bridge the gap her greed had carved. Ellen had believed in that possibility. She had written it into the trust itself. But for now, it felt like a dream too fragile to touch. I thought of Ellen often, her laugh, her fierce determination, the way she could walk into a room and bend it to her will. And I thought of her final words, "Don't let kindness be mistaken for weakness." I had kept that promise, but it had cost me more than I ever expected. One evening, as the sun sank low, I whispered to the empty house, "I hope you were right, Ellen. I hope she finds her way back." The house didn't answer, but the silence wasn't as heavy as before. Months passed. Seasons shifted. The sharp sting of grief dulled into a steady ache, the kind that lives in your bones but no longer keeps you from moving. The trust meetings with Whitman became routine. Investments, disbursements for my care, charitable contributions Ellen had chosen. Each time I signed a paper, I felt her hand guiding mine. Clara showed up less and less. Once, she demanded money for a business venture Eric was pitching. Whitman shut her down with a single line from the trust. No distributions without proof of employment and responsibility. Clara stormed out, shouting that Mom had betrayed her. But the more she railed, the more obvious it became. Ellen hadn't betrayed Clara. She had protected her from herself. One morning, I received a letter in the mail from the scholarship fund Ellen had endowed. They had chosen their first recipient, a nursing student named Marisol, the daughter of immigrants working 2 jobs to pay tuition. She wrote to thank us, to thank Ellen. I sat at the table, reading her words through blurred eyes. This was the legacy Ellen had wanted. Not greed, not entitlement. Opportunity, hope, love carried forward. I realized then that guarding the love didn't mean fixing Clara overnight. It meant making sure the world still felt Ellen's kindness, even if Clara couldn't. That night, I walked through the house slowly, touching the walls, the furniture, the photographs. Each corner held a memory. Each memory held a lesson. In our bedroom, Ellen's ring still rested in its box on the dresser. I lifted it gently, holding it in my palm. "We did it," I whispered. "We kept it safe." The stars shone through the bay window, casting silver light across the floor. I could almost hear her voice. "For every second we have left." I knew then that my seconds, however many remained, would be spent not in bitterness, but in gratitude. Gratitude for the life we built, for the love we shared, for the foresight she left behind. Clara might one day return. She might not. But either way, Ellen's promise was kept. The love was guarded. The legacy endured. I closed the ring box and placed it back on the dresser. Tomorrow, I would paint the porch. The day after, maybe fix the garden gate. Little acts of building, just as I always had. Because that's who I was, the builder, the guardian, the man Ellen trusted. And as long as I breathed, I would carry her words like a shield. Guard the love, Roy, not the money. And I would, always.